Okay, so we have our last presenter, Andatra Yaniso, or Sara General, belongs to the Turtle Clan and the Mohawk Nation. She lives in the community of Six Nations by the Grand River on Turtle Island with her husband and daughters. She's a writer, an artist, a language learner, and a researcher. Sara is the director of Deyohahá and research at Six Nations Polytechnic. Sara has a Bachelor of Arts in English and Indigenous Studies, holds a Master's in Educational Leadership, and a Doctor of Education at Western University. Her doctoral research explored the notion of collaboration in the area of Indigenous language revitalization as informed by a Haudenosaunee oral tradition. Her research interests include storytelling and oral histories, Indigenous research, methodology, and Indigenous language revitalization. So as we have with other presentations today, we should have time for about 10 minutes questions afterwards, and then we'll bring our day to a close.
I do not have it. Scano Swagwego. Scano ge? Easy. Aha! Scano! I'm good. I'm at peace. Scano. So, Nyawa for the introduction, and Nyawa everybody for the invigorating day. I had to bring my laptop up here with me because I was taking crazy notes all day about all of the things, and I want to thank all of the speakers for what you shared because it definitely has helped give me new ideas and fill in some of the questions that I've had about the work that we're doing at Six Nations and at Deyohahá. So I've titled my talk, Downgo Got Donge, We're Telling Stories Through Time. As was mentioned, I'm a writer, a storyteller, and so stories are very much on my mind all of the time. So to tell you a little bit about, this is going to be my presentation overview. I'm going to tell a little bit about Deyohahá, some background, a little discussion around tensions, our community context, learning about our partners, and some interesting practices that I've encountered recently that I think can really help Deyohahá navigate some of these questions that we're thinking about in terms of what Indigenous archives look like, what do issues of access look like, and how do we engage our community to help us answer some of those questions. So Deyohahá is a lot of things. It is a community archive. It's a library for SMP students and our community. It's a research center. They do a lot of public engagement. We just do several different things. At SMP, we are really fortunate to work with Indigenous knowledge guardians who help us, they guide us, they advise us on a lot of matters, and I'm going to be sharing a little bit about some of the work that we do with them. Being all of the things that we are, being a library, being an archive, being a space where collection materials exist means that we kind of have to be tuned into the discussions that are happening across what people have referred to today as the GLAM sector. On a personal level, Deyohahá has been really significant for my own learning. As was mentioned, my background is in the area of Indigenous education and language revitalization. And so I'm not an archivist, but my dissertation work was in this area of engaging with archival materials and with the archives of our nation, who, you know, many people have mentioned, are vested in many places, including land and including people. So this research process has brought me a lot closer to stories and a lot closer to materials. And I'm also a language learner, an artist, a parent who's committed to transmitting as much of this knowledge as I can to my children. So, and another note, and I just realized this as I was talking to my dad, I attended the ATOM, Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums symposium a few weeks ago in Temecula at Pechanga. And my father was a sculptor, and so I grew up kind of at the Woodland Cultural Center every year when they were putting on First Nations art exhibits, and listened to without really understanding the significance of the struggles of my father and his artists as they tried to make their way into national museums. his friends like Daphne Ojig and Carl Beam and Arthur Schilling and people who I met in these small museum contexts as they were trying to like reach out to museums and say there is a space for Indigenous art, traditional, contemporary, expressive in these national museums, but to which they were barred access. So this kind of notion of engaging with museums and these spaces that are in our community have been with me kind of my whole life. And Feather mentioned our Six Nations Public Library, and the Six Nations Public Library, it used to be housed at the old council house. So the Confederacy, who is the political government of our people, used to have this council house on 4th Line and next to the Veterans Park, and that was where the library was for some time. And it was the first place where I encountered Parker's Seneca, well, I guess it's Parker and Curtin's, right? Seneca fiction, myths, and legends. So all of these different spaces have had a definite impact on my own experience. And what that has meant is that I've had to really think about, in my role now, how do I support this community that is so diverse? It includes researchers, it includes language learners, it includes knowledge guardians and knowledge keepers, it includes children, it includes people who are living in urban settings and trying to reconnect. And it's really exciting to be able to figure out how do I best work with these this tremendous community. So this is a little snapshot of Deyohahá, so you can kind of get a sense of what I'm saying. We have like this library. Up here in the corner is Hubert Skykent, one of our Indigenous knowledge guardians who passed away. Really someone who I look up to as a role model. Various artifacts and things that we have, like a cradle board up there. So you get the sense that this is a space where a lot of things are. You'll see that not many of them are behind glass or tucked away. People kind of come in and they're just interacting with these things. We obviously do, like we often like to leave our wampum bells out, but we do keep them also kind of stored away so that they can be together. So it's a really lovely space, and if you happen to be at Six Nations of the Grand River, definitely come visit us there. So these are pictures of our Indigenous knowledge guardians. These are the people that we really try to work with to tackle some of these questions around access, around what is appropriate for us as an institute to wade into, because there's certainly things that it's not appropriate for us to wade into. What's exciting, I think, about the question of archives, and certainly with our people, is that there has really been this unbroken chain of transmitting knowledge and ceremony and culture and language that exists. And I feel like every time I always want to point that out and remember that were it not for the sacrifices of certain people in our communities, that wouldn't have happened. And they did so at tremendous personal sacrifice at times to keep these ceremonies alive for us. And that practice of archives, and I'll talk about a little later, is something that we want to think about. How do we support that without trying to yank it into these other contexts that we all kind of commonly known as mainstream archival or museum or library practices. This is, again, some of them doing work with us. We work with them in a couple of different ways, on documentation projects, on research projects. So I mentioned some of the tensions, and when I went to school, I did my doctoral work at the University of Western, and I did my work in the area of Indigenous language revitalization, because Indigenous language is very important to me. I'm a learner myself, and it was a very difficult experience. I mean, I think I've heard a couple of people talk about like some of the tensions that you experience as a grad student, kind of being isolated, but also really wanting to do good work and wanting to contribute to your community. And certainly some of those tensions were around the various paradigms that you're trying to engage with as you map out how are you going to tell the story of your data and what you're finding and what you're engaging with. For me, those tensions are very familiar to the tensions that I've heard people talk about today when they're talking about archives and notions of access, etc. What really helped me kind of move through and address and really complete my work, I think, was really kind of stepping back and grounding myself in stories and in utilizing an Indigenous research methodology and using a conceptual framework that was inspired by one of our belts. and using that to help me map through what are our stories telling us about collaboration. And I'm hearing that kind of word has been mentioned several times today, to think about what is a positive collaboration. To answer that question, I definitely turned to stories, and I definitely turned to this belt, which was, the Hiawatha Belt. And this belt tells the story of how our people came to collaborate during a time of great strife and established the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And in knowing that and trying to choose this, I'll just sort of step back to this slide. Our knowledge is vested in so many different places. That's true, that it isn't ever easy to just choose one and say, this is the framework that I'm going to use, because it's related to so many things. I mean, as an example, Heather mentioned today that we had this corn growing project. And yes, we had this corn growing project, and also Derek was able to go out and make this corn pounder, and we had students come and be involved in the process of making the corn. And we had one of our local knowledge keepers come in and talk to us about the stories about how to grow corn really successfully. And we also, through some of our community scholars, one of them is here today, we're able to access this old Hewitt report. And Hewitt was one of the ethnographers who took collections of our stories. And one of them was a story about like the spirit of corn and how corn communicated. So altogether, these things, what my point is that they all talk to each other. All of these different knowledges talk to each other. The songs, the wampum, the belts, the strings, the stories, the archival documents. There's a relationship there. And that's a really exciting thing about it. So for this, in trying to think about the last couple of months about this talk, and as Alan said, he mentioned a Cushman article, which I also read, and it's very good. If anyone has not had a chance to read it, it helped me think through like what does a decolonial archive look like. And I felt like one of the easiest ways for me to sort of think about this was to organize the things that I was reading, the things that I was hearing, the discussions that I was having with different knowledge guardians about notions of archives, with them to kind of utilize the two-row. And of course, Heather kind of talked about the two-row this morning, this relationship that we have, this treaty that we have between us, rooted in peace and friendship, but also respecting that we have these different knowledge paths, the ship, the canoe, and that we had to be respectful of that, the integrity of those systems, and not interfere. And as we've heard today, there has been a lot of interference. There continues to be a lot of interference, and that is part of the work. So an easy way for me to kind of sort of capture, and I'm just going to remove this so I can move around, to sort of capture some of what I was hearing is to sort of think about this middle space as kind of a space of engagement for these different ideas that we had. And very quickly, I would certainly probably love to take more time and think about this, but this notion of what the purpose is, and in the article that Ellen mentioned, there was someone named Powell. I don't know what Powell's first name was, but in that Tim, and he was talking about archives being these imperial projects. And I was kind of thinking about what archives are, and I think there are many things, and I really appreciated Alan's talk today about what they are and how they're manifested in this notion of council fires. When I was reading through the creation story, some of the examples, there were so many mentions of peace and this peacefulness of mind, 37 mentions all over the place, a married couple should be in peaceful relationships with each other. We're putting these here so that it can bring peace to your mind. So for us, I think these reminders about why these ceremonies have come back to us time and time again. Derek talked about these different times this messages has come to us. It's to help bring us back around to this place of peace. I think there's also these different views about ownership. So if you work in archival work, that's often attributed to individual creators, whereas for us, it's definitely a very collective person. Heather talked about, no one person can claim to have and to be the sole owner of our knowledges. And I think, we've talked about some of these things, the worldviews, notions of access, open and public versus, there's definitely protocols about that, how that's approached in our community, many others, how things are transmitted, recorded and documented, oral and lived, and also, as Ellen said, written, and preservation. this notion that from Marge's Trail to the Wampum, that it's kind of this static form and locked away, versus, you know, handled and renewed and here, and that there has been a lot of care and people have repaired bells that have, you know, that require repair. And so it's not that you shut them away to protect them, it's that you continue to work with them. And if you're continuing to work with them, you're continuing to pass things on. That is archival work. You stop necessitating the need to salvage things because you're continually doing that. And so we're really appreciative of Derek and Tanis and the public programming that they do, because they're going out and learning these essential skills and passing them on. And Taylor talked about certain practices not being perhaps as practiced as they were previously, and documents being able to reconnect us with those things. So I wanted to share a quick example for us of some of the various places where Haudenosaunee materials are held. There's certainly more than are listed here, but we were fortunate to have a meeting with many of these people at the Woodland Cultural Center that was organized by Amos Key, one of our Indigenous knowledge guardians, and the who's now with Brock University. But these are some of the people that we're working to build relationships with. And there's many, many more. So I feel like one of the roles that I have as a director is try to understand and facilitate, I suppose, like a digital repatriation of some of these items that are in this collection so that it can come back. I showed you the picture of our older knowledge keepers and our language speakers. Those people live and work at the Six Nations community, so it's definitely easier for them to be able to come to Deyohahá than to travel to many of these places to access various things. I really quickly wanted to show you this to give you a quick idea of the different, I know that's probably not showing up actually. Do you know how I bring that up? And what it is that I'm going to show you is an Excel sheet that just sort of lists all of the various researchers that have worked with Haudenosaunee collections. And I was telling Catherine that I had this idea that what I would do is I would share it with all of the archivists so that if you see this name and you have this in your collection, you can contact me about maybe trying to say, oh, you know what, I did have some Barbo stuff, or you know what, I do have some of this, and maybe you would like a copy of it, because we absolutely, definitely would. Thanks, Catherine. Okay, thank you. So I'll just list you some of the names and kind of just show you a little bit of the work that we're trying to do. So our Six Nations Confederacy Council minutes, we know a lot of those are held at the Library and Archives Canada. The J&B Hewitt collection, which our language speakers love because Hewitt was one of those really meticulous, he called himself a philologist back in those days, but linguist. So he really paid attention to how the words were written. And it makes it much easier for our speakers to work with updating that orthography now. We know we have a lot of his collection at the Smithsonian, and we have a relatively good working relationship with them. Taylor mentioned Frederick Wilkinson Waugh, Canadian History Museum. But there's so many more: Alexander Goldenweiser, Franz Boas, Paul Wallace, William Beauchamp, Sir William Johnson. There's these William Johnson papers, a beautiful 14-volume set that we would love to have at Deyohahá. So if you have one and you felt like repatriating something to us, we're looking for that. Tell your friends. Erminie Smith, Lehman Gibson, Lewis Henry Morgan. There's just so many people. William Fenton, who we know has some work at APS. I'm certain that it's other places. And I know for sure that one of our Indigenous knowledge guardians is very interested in some of Fenton's work and notebooks. What I'll also say about these collections, and I'll just sort of go through and show you, it kind of goes on and on and on. There's so many people that have worked with and gathered materials, is that we aren't just interested in their published work. We're very interested in their notebooks. We're very interested in their notes. So, I think I've mentioned over here that they do have, I would like to kind of evolve this particular work to sort of show, okay, well, what is the collection? Is it photographic? Is it digital? Is it audio? Is it documents? And really try to map out some of those pieces. So certainly we know that they have these published records, but it would really help the research community that we work with to distribute some of the work if we could kind of access these collections and make that happen a little bit easier. So thank you for indulging me with looking at my spreadsheet. I know how much we all look looking at spreadsheets, but That one's been a helpful one. So Six Nations of the Grand River, we heard people talk about it today. It's such a unique place. And I feel like this is why that relationship building is so important, because there's actually a lot of different organizations in our community who care about archives and library resources. Before I came to Six Nations Polytechnic, I worked for the Chiefs of Ontario, which is an advocacy organization for the 133 First Nations in Ontario. And I worked there for maybe 7 or 8 years. And what was wonderful about that experience was I got to visit a lot of communities across Turtle Island and absolutely saw that there was this movement and a lot of ideas about how best to do this work of passing on language and culture. I didn't see a single community where that wasn't a priority. And I didn't see a single community who didn't have ideas for themselves about how that work should be done. So definitely in building those relationships is important. But as Feather and Anita mentioned, capacity is such a huge challenge. We definitely have a government who has swayed between not wanting to honor our agreements, even when told that they must, backtracking on agreements, making false promises. And we want to think that this is old rhetoric of the past, and it really isn't, which is challenging as well. So in trying to develop relationships with communities, it is possible that that capacity work is yet to happen. And I think people are asking really good questions when they say, how do we help? I think there's people in community that definitely have ideas, but they definitely need resources. So we're very lucky. We have several different organizations, Lands and Resources, very concerned with land claims research. And they have different archival needs, perhaps, than our language revitalization workers. Maps, old documents, old minutes, wampum, older agreements. Figuring out how to develop a good collaborative working relationship with them takes time to understand what their needs are. We heard from the Six Nations Public Library. We have a Six Nations Record Office. We have a Six Nations Lands of Membership. We have the Woodland Cultural Center. And of course, ourselves. So there's definitely these themes of language and cultural revitalization, language and education peppered throughout, and there's many more things besides. And there's also the fact that research can be so fun and invigorating. It can be really traumatic, and I would think that's really important that people talk about when you're encountering something that you've never encountered before, because the education system hasn't necessarily foregrounded certain stories. And I think that's a truth of the archival practice as well. And Krista McCracken's article, a really great article she wrote that they wrote that I'll talk about later. They mention and quote somebody who says, not all stories are recorded, not all histories are shared, and that there's that lack of neutrality in how these records are kept. So something that I'll maybe come back to after. A little bit of our work then, just to kind of summarize, is definitely to coordinate acquisition of these materials. We are a small staff. I think most of us were here today. There were 6 of us all together. And we're all working very hard to do a variety of each of these tasks. Digitizing collections, creating records of incoming material, workshops, policy development, outreach, maintenance and revitalization work, documentation, and just working with the collection. The maintenance and revitalization work is really challenging. This year, we've tried to tackle that through having really focused language immersion programs that were also attached to documentation work. So right now we're running, with the support of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, a 3-year Cayuga language immersion project. And we're so grateful for this project. We're hoping to create through 3 years, 8 advanced level speakers of Cayuga, and along the way kind of train them with documenting and working with transcripts, and doing some of the work that Alan mentioned is really important to kind of help the workflow along so that we make it easier for people to work with these transcripts. So we're really excited about that project, but definitely doing all of this work means you have to be super strategic with what you do. And for us, I think that includes kind of learning about our partners and the work that you are doing. And I feel like a lot of really positive intention from this room, similar to, I guess, what were they called? those rooms where you walk in and you see the belts and you're like, oh, I can tell that you are committed. I mean, I feel that energy as well from this gathering, and I really appreciate that. So in trying to learn a little bit about the work that's happening, I mentioned the article there. I have it at the bottom. Yeah, challenging colonial spaces, reconciliation and decolonizing work in Canadian archives. And this article was really helpful to me in knowing what steps had been taken so that it was easier to see what the dialogue could possibly be, at least from like our perspective.
Krista's article did a really great job of outlining some of the background, and they outlined what some of the work might be in some of the next steps. So Krista, if you ever see this, or if anyone knows her, I think Kylie knows her, now if we're sharing this. It was helpful to me in kind of figuring out how to process the TRC recommendations and how they were being processed, and how to also kind of think through what we're experiencing at the community level. Because I imagine that the article talks about the work being really intensive to respond. But definitely, I hope what you've heard from us today, it is equally intensive, because we have these other priorities that we have to really deal with first, that we can do. Alan mentioned that we can help correct the record. Help to get the recently shared an example of the Smithsonian Institute records that wasn't properly labeled as Seneca, but the language is actually Onondaga. We wouldn't know that unless he could speak that language. So for us, language revitalization work is so intensive, it's so demanding, it would take all of our time, but it's so important so that we can work with these archives in really great ways and have more people who are able to take on some of this work. So it was really interesting to kind of see, in the article, it links to this task force charter and this action plan. And in the action plan, it kind of identified, these protocols, or specific kind of protocols to help us work with communities. And I felt like when that's a great idea. And I was telling you, we almost need a network as well amongst ourselves, so we can say, is this a protocol that will work for us? One of the last task force reports was always for museums. It's 1994. It was some work convened by the AFN, but it was really helpful in sort of setting out what some of the relationship could look like. And then also, she did mention the Archive Association of Ontario had kind of created this resource list and had dedicated an issue of Boston records looking at this question as well. So these are great things to know, to understand kind of where the archival practitioners are at in terms of having access to information that will make our discussion go a little bit easier. So I mentioned that I went to AFOM, and I think I had included this slide just basically to say, yes, there's all this work happening on in your ship on this stellar archive side of our 2 row. And with us as well, the work has never gone away. We're still very much engaged in the revitalization and happening doing our ceremony and honoring creation in the ways that we've been told, and we'll keep doing so. But things that were interesting practices, at least to me, to help work through some of those tensions that I mentioned earlier. One of them is this protocol for Native American materials. This was passed and supported by the Society of American Archivists in 2018. And I learned about it through just doing some research on the ATOM site. And what was interesting, I also found this article, Taylor mentioned we have this really great relationship with the American Philosophical Society, and it's true, we were very fortunate for that. They mentioned in this article below that part of what helped them was they took these protocols, they adapted them to their organizations, and they used that to kind of facilitate their outreach to various First Nations communities. And in doing so, you mentioned this, they felt like what that did was it helped new First Nations from being subject to being co-researchers. So I feel like these protocols really do help us think through what those relationships with researchers can be, and we definitely are ready for the recipients of that through the work with APS and others. The other piece that I'm really excited about is, and I heard about it last year when they kind of all convened at Women's Culture Center with the system called Local Team. Has anyone heard of this Local system? It's so exciting to me. The session that I attended at ASON was called Culturally Appropriate Digital Access. And what was awesome is that it does start to tackle a little bit the notion of so many things. So access is, it's similar to a website, but you can create like a little bit of access to what people can see. You can also utilize these IK labels and how they talked about different nations using these IK labels was kind of propose an alternative framework for copyright and really asserting copyright for First Nations and how they refer to it as like digital appropriation. So definitely they mentioned it's a work in progress. These IK labels or these CK labels didn't necessarily trump or override the copyright at this time, but it did assert something, which I found very interesting. And of course, like working really creatively with metadata, they were able to like embed their video, embed their dictionaries. And we have a lot of dictionaries that support our learners of our languages, and those are available in text dictionary form that someone has been adapted to like apps. So they're very, very helpful in this work that I mentioned. So I had a few slides just from the workshop. The Mokushi community has a really great support for the Sustainable Heritage Network, and these are just different examples of the communities that have built Mokushi sites. But what was so awesome, and what I love, because we have now been working with, as I mentioned, in our OTF project and other projects, really intensively to document speakers. And what's important to mention about this work is that some of this work might never be public. And that's okay. This work might only be for our people and for our speakers, and that's okay. And we should do work like this. And we are doing work like this, and we continue to do work like this. What I loved about this platform is it really enabled that work to happen. So this is a woman describing this basket in this picture. And, there's the picture. So right now, the ITC is working with past purpose. What's wonderful about Mokushi having those past purpose and all of the work that we're doing now is going to always be useful in our archival centers for the collection that we have. But it can also be pulled into the Mokushi system so that we don't have to replicate work. But it was cool because in the metadata that they were describing, they also filmed these women talking about the basket and sharing with her family stories about the basket, and that was included in kind of the whole entry for this basket, which is amazing. It was so much more powerful than just kind of like going through and seeing the picture and reading a brief description of it. So I am very, very excited about working on something like this in the future for our community. And of course, to do that, I mentioned our Indigenous knowledge guardians, our community scholars. We're fortunate that we have the history circles now. These at Six Nations Polytechnic, and they're wonderful, and they have so much community knowledge. And they definitely have ideas about the stories that we should be telling. These are the stories that can populate these kinds of programs, these kinds of platforms, and really create access for learners. If they can't come into Deyohahá for whatever reasons, they are located in that urban community and not always able to connect with Six Nations. Of course, the thing with these is that capacity is the issue. I just had another thought that was related to kind of libraries, but and maybe I'll kind of step back to that before I close here. But in a few years, this is an immediate project. This is something I think that we'll have to work towards and make sure that we have the capacity to be able to do it well. And that we've had really fulsome discussions with our guardians to say that this makes sense. And that we've engaged our research community to say, what is our plan? What are the stories that we want to tell? I'm really excited about that. I think a final note I wanted to share was about the issue of access, and we just finished having a library discussion. So Deyohahá also provides support for the Six Nations Polytechnic students. And definitely, while I really want us to stay true in alignment with the values of how Indigenous archives work within kind of our system, there's no denying that ideas literature reviews, that these kinds of things are helpful to the work that we're doing. Being able to access journals is very, very helpful for our students. And journal access, of course, is limited to Indigenous institutes, and something that we're actively looking to kind of unpack so that our research community always has access to the many, many journals that are out there that support language revitalization work, documentation work, repatriation work, so many different things that these journals can help us with. So, in trying to craft a vision forward and trying to think about how Deyohahá can be a part of this movement, a part of this public awareness raising, this part of maybe not decolonizing the archive, but helping the archives ask questions about what is not being included here, who is being left out, how do we go about repairing and creating this relationship. Those are questions I've seen answered well by Western academia, for the criticisms and attentions that we've had engaging with kind of positivist approaches. It is unpacking itself in its own way. We see that through what we learned in critical theory and disciplinary studies. It's happening, that unraveling is happening. So that's it for me. Thank you so much, Yana.
Hi. I studied Cretaceous history for my dissertation. So when you show that spreadsheet, I'm just thinking so many of those things are familiar to me. So many of those, there were anthropologists and historical figures and present day knowledge keepers amongst that list. But I'm just thinking there's so many. Years ago when I was doing my PhD at the beginning, Sue Hill, I remember saying to me, so many people come into our community and they learn a lot about our communities and they leave and they take the stories and then they get letters after their name. I've always remembered that, and that's obviously the responsibility of people who do research is to give back. I've given a lot of my research back to the Women Cultural Center and to the Genealogy Society, which you didn't have listed, but I thought they're another repository of knowledge doing historical work right in the community. But that list, I just think there's so many grad students and who know so much of that, and how could I'm trying to think how I could help, how other people who are doing that work, and there are lots of people who know where all that stuff is, So how can we somehow figure that out? And we keep talking about it. More of a comment, I guess, and question.
I think that's one thing that comes to mind. We're really lucky to have Heather George with us, and it's Unification's Legacy Consortium is another organization that I could put up there that did a lot of really great work around the 1812 commemoration and other pieces. So for me, one thing for me, I feel like I just want to go to every conference and put a big Deyohahá book and say, if you're a PhD, if you have a supervisor, if they're interested in it, send them to us. Because we have plenty of work to do, and we want it to be meaningful to the experience of the student. We know they have to do literature. We know they have to interpret the geography. We know they have to do preservation, and we have needed those things so that we aren't asking our language speakers and our linguists to be spreading themselves so thin. A lot of that work is really important, and others have talked about this. Building relationships with Indigenous knowledge parties, and it's not everybody can do that work. We have a really wonderful person who's so long with our guardians. It's wonderful to see the relationship. I think as an institute, we're always asking ourselves, how do we continue to support that without making it into the academic space? But if there are people engaged in academic space, looking for community connection, how can we support that too? Because all the work is important, all of it, every little bit. So if you have grad students, RA shift, please email me.
And their students go and do work. And for sure, they do a lot of work on this health side.
My question is just, how do we get copies of this spreadsheet? How do we email? I was only laughing, I'm not joking. Like, these are the collections that we're looking for. We are a small staff. There are people out here who are encountering this work through many different fields. If they're finding it and we can co-populate it. I'm really interested in these digital humanities projects. We haven't talked about them for the digital humanities, but to me, that's the kind of thing that, the location of resources, I think, can be crowdsourced. And I always want to check these ideas with my parties. Like, can I share this with my parties? I imagine the answer would be yes, because we want to know where these things are, so it's easier for us to do this, to appreciate them until such time as we can appreciate them and move forward.
I just want to follow up on the work that you were talking with Boogaloo and the idea of collaboration and the fact that there's lots of people in the room here that are invested in these issues and creating these collections. And my major concern is infrastructure, and then it's not a question that any of us I think can answer right now, but the idea of creating infrastructure that is community centered, but takes into account the isolation, bad bandwidth, the need for things to be protected, and then the fact that once you start digitizing material, there's additional risk of loss. And I'm just curious what your thoughts of how infrastructure plays into. When I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about like servers and people who can manage those repositories.
So we've been lucky, like I said, for us, local food is going to be, if we decide to do it, it's going to be a slow. So we're lucky that we are in the south, we are able to access high-speed internet. We do have an IT department who's sort of been looking at the software what the capacity needs of this are. I think I'm more comfortable that we could probably meet the infrastructure needs. But again, I'm less comfortable until you kind of solidify different. Oh, there's so much work to do, like research fellowship, make sure people are doing their research. My priority is definitely language revitalization and documentation, hands down. I will not even look at English 2 until we have really solid 1,000 hours of well-recorded documented transcribed materials. And that's a personal thing. Other people will definitely have different priorities. I think I have all the priorities, but that's kind of my number one. And so I feel like we can handle, as we're trying to look at that, the slow build of those infrastructure projects. And it was really great to go there and sort of talk to some of the organizations that have implemented it. One person came in and she said, it was thanks to like a research assistant that she was able to get anything out there. A 6 weeks intern, 80 objects. So, it's definitely what we've heard. It's an investment. And it's what do you invest in first? And right now, I don't think we invest in problems. So, it's balance. But we're lucky. We're lucky to make friends with people like Mars, at other institutes, at other researchers who help us and help us kind of identify how do we prioritize? How do we tell our stories? What are the most important stories?
That's a really interesting point because that really speaks more than anything else to research ethics. Because most researchers do not think about the communities first. And as you and I talk about, one of the issues I run into is at the University of Pennsylvania, I can bring 10 students into the field and into the archives, into museums, into the communities, but my university will not give me funding to bring your community members further. So that's something that has to change on a wider level among institutions, is to find ways to use that funding that the museums and the colleges and universities have to help you do this work. I mean, I do it because I'm driven, but we need more than that. And then speaking to this issue of what graduate students know, what community members may not know, there's an awful lot of correcting that needs to be done in the archives. Because any of you who do this work know there are myths that populate the archives and perpetuate themselves, and every new generation of students perpetuates them. And it takes a lot of work to understand them. So one way to start with open access would be like corrective process. You don't have to put new information out there in order to start correcting the flawed information, or even creating protocols for the sensitive information. So this is more just a, don't slow down,
Right?
you're doing that great work.
Thank you so much. One thing I think too that I really want to underscore that Heather mentioned, and you mentioned it recently, we see the same tensions. Like I help them as a researcher here, as I feel like I'm trying to support this work in kind of like an industry capacity. The tensions are similar across museums, across archives, across libraries, across research. And so for me, kind of being aware and trying to take an integrated approach to that. You guys talked about, no, we really do need to convene this network. So I mentioned that it's great that people are developing protocols. I'm not sure we've had a discussion, and this is the components of the protocol from the Native American Material I mentioned for the United States. Archivists northern aspect of Turtle Island necessarily haven't had a chance to come together to look at this. But it's not just archivists that we need, it is manuscripts, it is researchers, it is historians, it is a lot of people that we need to connect together to say, this is the way we see this protocol working, and not necessarily for every community, because I mentioned not every community is going to have the same capacity. It's just like Heather said, you have to do that kind of slow build and that relationship building time. But it would be great if there could be some coordination and discussion amongst these different pillars that Heather mentioned are separated into the stream. But the issues that we're experiencing coming from this Western Eurocentric worldview permeate all of us. And as we're trying to kind of protect the integrity of our own Indigenous archival work, we have to be aware of all of these different pieces. So I'm going to echo Heather's calls, and I hope that we all can kind of come together to sort of think about some of these issues, and that maybe that could be a way to communicate a common message across all of these fields, libraries, archives, museums, universities, and institutes about some of the ways we can use this system. Thank you.